أجمعين أما بعد. All praise belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for granting us the ability to come to His house. We ask Allah to accept our ibadah, forgive our shortcomings, grant us the khair of this day and protect us from all types of evil. Ameen ya Rabbal Alameen. Regarding the actions which are considered to be major sins in the terminology of Quran and Sunnah, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam considered them to be al-muhlikat, actions that destroys the belief as well as good actions of believers. The first thing in the top of the list is ascribing partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which Allah describes it to be la dhulmun azim. Inna shirka la dhulmun azim. Indeed, shirk is the greatest oppression that a person can do in this world. When we talk about dhulm, the definition of dhulm is وَضْعُ الشَّيْءِ فِي غَيْرِ مَحَلِّهِ, to put something where it doesn't belong, to do something that is not right. Now the dhulm happens by this individual in many different areas. The first is, what is the dhulm in connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, Inna a'zama al-dhanbi, the greatest sin that a person can commit, an taj'ala lillahi niddan wa huwa khalaqak. It's that you ascribe partners with Allah despite the fact you know that Allah has created you. Allah is your khaliq. But your belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is weak, and in fact you are ascribing and you are making someone else in that part in the act of this as the partner of Allah, na'udhu billah. And this is considered to be the greatest sin that a person can ever commit. Now this action happens sometimes knowingly and unknowingly. If it happens knowingly, if a person does it deliberately, then of course he cannot be amongst those who will get success, and he will get salvation in this dunya and in the life of hereafter. إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَغْفِرُ أَن يُشْرَكَ بِهِ وَيَغْفِرُ مَا دُونَ ذَلِكَ لِمَن يَشَاءُ. Allah Azza wa Jal will not forgive those who have come to Allah with having this type of belief in their minds. When a person thinks that any creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala shares the same quality of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if a person has belief in any way, then this person cannot be successful. He is a failure individual in this life, and he will be failure on the day of judgment. He will lose completely in this dunya, and he will lose completely in akhirah. So that's the first thing that a person needs to stay away from. And for that, the Prophet ﷺ has ordered us, because as the times go forward, trials will come. And sometimes that trials will come upon our faith. When a person has to choose between the two, his possession, his loved ones in this dunya versus believing in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when a person's faith is weak at that junction, then unfortunately his choice will be something that is not pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is why a person needs to ask Allah Azza wa Jal on a daily basis to give him strong faith. Because a person no one can be confident enough that, no, this action I will never do in my life. There are many people who don't think that they're doing this action, but eventually they go and fall into this trap. By believing in something, by doing something. As the Prophet ﷺ described in the hadith, that there will be a time from the signs of the day of judgment, a time will come, a person will be a believer in the beginning of the day, and he will lose his faith by the end of the day. Or he will be a believer at night, and he will lose his faith by morning. Why? Because the things of this world will become more valuable to him than Allah and His deen. And today we see that in a minute level in every person's life. that how much we are able to sacrifice our religion just for the worldly cause. A person is willing to sacrifice his ability to be spent in learning the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala versus the arts of the world. This is something that we see very commonly found. Similarly, a person is able to give preference to other things over what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded. So a lot of these things that we don't realize, but our actions and our choices and our selections are showing that we give preference to these other things of the world rather than the hukum of Allah and the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And by doing this in small and in minute level, a person will eventually take it to the higher level where you start having to ascribe partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is why Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he put a hold on this from the beginning. If you go into this level, and that's it. There is no turning back. If a person dies without faith, if a person dies with shirk, then there is no success for him. On the day of judgment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will disown this person and he will have a very miserable situation. And for a fact that a believer dies with sin, there is a hope that one day he will go into Jannah. But an individual dying without faith, there is no hope of him going into Jannah at all. So we ask Allah Azza wa Jal to protect all of us. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us amongst true believers, protect our iman. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us among those who have their religion solely and only for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ameen ya Rabbal Alameen. Jazakumullahu khairan. Subhanallahi wa bihamdihi. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. Wa nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa